Welcome to Nice and Blunt. These are my tight end and defensive rankings for week 9. And if you're watching this video as a YouTube member, really appreciate you. This video is posted early for members only. So if you want early access, join the Blunt rotation down below for $4.20 a month, $1 per week. You get this video about 36-ish hours in advance than everybody else. So let's get into it. Let's start at tight end with matchups. And let's run through every matchup as well. Just like quarterback, in blue, we have the season-long stats, and then in red, we have the last 4 games. So whether they're trending up or down, at number 1, the best matchup by far is Cincinnati, and they've given up so many touchdowns, 5 of them in just the last 2 weeks. They are by far the best spot. They are a touchdown waiting to happen. So at tight end, I am going to trust Colston Loveland much more than I have previously, but he's been really bad so far. He's been really hard to trust at all, and so for that reason, I'm not dying to fully lock him into the lineup, but based on the upgrade, I would expect a touchdown is not a bad bet at all to make with Loveland, but Cole Kmet might come back from injury. If that does happen, I'd be more reluctant to trust a Bears tight end, given I don't know exactly who the guy is that you want the most. But if it's just Loveland and no Kmet, then Loveland gets a massive upgrade. I would expect a good game from Loveland. Perhaps his breakout is about to happen. At number 2, the second best matchup is Pittsburgh. So Tyler Warren, always a lock in your lineup, probably plays better than anyone this week. I think Tyler Warren should have a fantastic performance against the Steelers. The third best matchup goes to JaTavion Sanders this week. The Packers are pretty vulnerable in this department. And although Rodgers didn't really capitalize throwing touchdowns to tight ends last week, the Packers are still a very good spot that you want to chase. So touchdowns have been available. The Packers have given up 5 tight end touchdowns in just 7 games this season. And then they also give up 8.5 receptions to the position. That is by far the most of any team. They don't give up great yardage. Despite that volume, the efficiency isn't really high. But in terms of targets to the position, there's a lot of passes that go in that direction. So I would expect JaTavion to get a big upgrade this week. The matchup indicates he's a legit streaming option against the Packers in week 9. The fourth best matchup goes to Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. The Colts have been really vulnerable against tight ends as well. And in the last 4 games, they are averaging 100 yards per game allowed to the tight end position. So because it's split between those 2 players, it's not ideal, but the volume has been really safe to bet on for opposing tight ends against Indianapolis. In the last 4 games, those numbers have jumped to 18.4 points per game. You want to start tight ends against the Colts, generally speaking, but Oronde Gadsden really does skew some of these numbers. So maybe you don't trust Jonnu or Freiermuth enough, but on paper, they do get an upgrade. And then the 5th best matchup does go to Jake Ferguson against Arizona. But last week, we thought he had a good matchup as well, and he did nothing with it. He had a bagel. Based on the stats, this matchup does resemble that Carolina matchup he had a few weeks ago when he had 2 touchdowns. So given the bagel, I would expect Jake Ferguson to really bounce back. The Cardinals are very vulnerable at stopping tight ends. They allow 75 yards per game and 3 touchdowns in their last 4. The volume should be there. I think Ferguson will get back in the end zone. I'm 100% starting Jake Ferguson against Arizona. But New England is also a very good matchup. They gave up 2 touchdowns to the Cleveland tight end core last week and also 99 receiving yards. In the last month, they are averaging 71 yards per game allowed to the tight end position. So I do think Kyle Pitts will have good yardage this week. I think Kyle Pitts deserves a significant upgrade, especially if London doesn't play. I would assume the volume will be there for Kyle Pitts, but I don't trust Pitts in general, so hard to endorse him top 10, but I do think he's a legit streaming option this week. That is for sure. And then at number 7 on this list, we do have the Washington Commanders as a plus matchup. So AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo should have a good game here, and I trust AJ Barner a lot more. He's been scoring touchdowns, pretty underrated, pretty under the radar, and Washington has given up 3 tight end touchdowns in just their last 2 games. So I like this spot for AJ Barner, a very good streaming option. Don't dismiss him at all. At number 8 on the list, the Carolina Panthers are a good matchup as well. So Tucker Kraft continues his stint of significant upgrades. I feel like I've mentioned Kraft getting a good matchup in every single game for the last 6 weeks. Kraft has been really lucky in terms of scheduling, but he's also just really talented and kind of matchup proof. So Kraft should be a lock in the lineup yet again. Based on his production this year, you're definitely not benching Tucker Kraft. But next best matchup goes to Zack Ertz this week against the Seahawks. And we did see Dalton Schultz put up 98 yards on them 2 weeks ago. So maybe off the bye, they address this weakness and are less vulnerable. But given Terry has been ruled out and Daniels is probably the starter, I would expect Zack Ertz to step up yet again. Ertz should be a solid streamer against Seattle in week 9. The Ravens tight ends also get an upgrade against Miami. The Dolphins have been relatively vulnerable. They're giving up 12 points per game to the position. So given Isaiah Likely ran higher routes last week, there is a chance that gets distributed between the two. But in general, as long as Lamar Jackson is the quarterback, I am trusting Mark Andrews in my lineup. So he's a safe start. And then Brock Bowers returns to your lineup and gets a very good matchup here, especially in the last 4 games. The numbers against Jacksonville have skyrocketed in the last 4 weeks, up to 15.4 points per game. And the last time we saw them, they gave up 101 yards to the Rams tight end core. So I like this spot a lot for Brock Bowers. He's a lock in the lineup regardless, but against Jacksonville, he gets a very big upgrade. I would expect about 15 plus points from Bowers against Jacksonville. Next, best matchup goes to Sam LaPorta, and this is probably the last one I consider a significant upgrade. The last one that allows more than 11 points per game would be Minnesota. So LaPorta should be a solid play this week. I think the yardage will be there for him. Maybe the touchdown evades him, but the Vikings have given up 4 tight end touchdowns in their last 5 games. I think the odds are pretty decent for LaPorta to pay off. So I like him. I think he's a good start this week as always. And then these next several matchups hovering around 11 to 9.5 points per game. This is the neutral zone, all of the average matchups that don't upgrade or downgrade whoever is facing them. But next on the list would be Tanner Conner of the Miami Dolphins facing off against Baltimore. With Darren Waller on IR, you cannot trust the Dolphins tight end. Next on the list would be George Kittle facing off against the Giants, and off the bagel, he did find the end zone last week, so I would expect that to be pretty consistent for him, especially with Brock Purdy expected to return. That's definitely going to bode well. Purdy and Kittle have an elite chemistry. No doubt about it, you're starting Kittle. That's for sure. Next on the list would be Noah Fant against Chicago. The Bears have been a decent matchup, but not many touchdowns allowed. I would only expect some decent yardage from Fant. That is kind of all you can bet on against Chicago. They've only given up 2 touchdowns on the year to the position. Next on the list would be TJ Hockenson, who goes up against Detroit in a revenge game. But given he's been with the Vikings for like 3 years now, I don't really consider it a massive upgrade. It might even be longer than that. It might be 4 years now with the Vikings. The rivalry does not carry as much weight as it once did. So Hockenson in a neutral matchup, not going to start him because he's been pretty mediocre this season. And then the next matchup is on bye, so the Bucks are irrelevant. And then the next one goes to Tyler Higbee and Jake Ferguson of the Rams. New Orleans is neutral overall. Then we have Oronde Gadsden getting Tennessee, so he's been really good. I would expect yardage to still be there for Gadsden. He's been lights out last 2 games. Next up would be McBride against Dallas. McBride is always in your lineup, so not going to bench him, that's for sure. But then San Francisco has gotten more difficult against this position lately. Last month down to 6.7, but on the year it's still 9.4 points per game allowed. So I think Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger are going to be fine. I'm not worried about them. And given Cam Scatterby went down, this team might be throwing the ball a little bit extra. So Theo Johnson, good bet for a touchdown in general. I do think Theo Johnson is a solid streaming option this week. But in the last month, the Niners have not given up a single touchdown to the position. So that's why these stats are starting to move down on the list. But next player on the chart would be Dalton Schultz, who gets the Denver Broncos. The matchup is okay, especially lately. It's been getting a bit better against Denver. But 2 weeks ago, they gave up 154 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Giants. And that is where these stats are skewed a little bit. So maybe you'll trust Dalton Schultz, but last week he kind of shit the bed. He was not fully healthy. He did get banged up pretty bad against Seattle, but he played through it. Last week was a disappointment. I don't know if you trust Schultz too much. But 2 out of the next 3 matchups are on bye. The Jets and Cleveland are irrelevant. And right in between them would be the Chargers, who get Chig Okonkwo. So not dying to upgrade Okonkwo, that's for sure. Definitely not starting him. And then Houston is definitely in the big downgrade territory. Now, at this point in the chart, we are hitting the big downgrades overall. So Evan Engram, not a safe play against Houston, not dying to trust him. He's usually just a floor play. But Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill going to have a very bad game given Tyler Shuck's the quarterback, and the Rams are a big downgrade. Hunter Long is not a trustworthy option in general, so he gets a downgrade against Las Vegas while Strange is on IR. And then Dalton Kincaid gets a tough spot here against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not dying to upgrade Kincaid. Off the injury, he didn't look too good last week. But the next matchup is on bye. The Eagles have been pretty tough, so at least that's off the slate. Don't have to worry about it. But then Travis Kece against Buffalo does get a bad matchup here on paper. The Bills have really shut down opposing tight ends, so maybe you're going to worry about Kece. But after last week's 99 yards and a touchdown, I'm probably still going to trust Travis Kece. Last player on the list, though, would be Hunter Henry, who gets Atlanta, and this is the worst matchup on paper. I'm not going to trust Hunter Henry, especially given Austin Hooper sometimes vultures him. So those are the matchups at tight end, every single one. Now let's move on to my rankings. At number 1, I'm going to trust the elite production that we assumed would be there for Brock Bowers. I think he'll play, and as long as he does, he's my tight end 1 on the week. The Jags don't scare me. I think he's going to be hungry to get back on the field. And last time we saw him fully healthy was week 1 when he had over 100 yards and left the game early against the Patriots. So start Brock Bowers. Definitely don't bench him. If he's healthy enough to play, you've been waiting this long, definitely put him in the lineup. The next tier, though, is absolutely bust proof. There is no chance I'm benching any of these players. Trey McBride has been lights out last 2 games, but it does correlate with Jacoby Brissett. So if Kyler is indeed the starter, I might downgrade him a little bit, but would still stay in this tier. McBride will absolutely be locked in to the top 4, but I'm hopeful that Brissett is the quarterback against Dallas. There should be a lot of upside, so I will trust McBride as an elite start yet again. But number 3, Tyler Warren gets the second best matchup on the slate this week. So given his production this year, you have to trust him. Definitely an upgrade. I would expect a touchdown guaranteed for Tyler Warren. I almost ranked him at number 1, but I'm willing to respect and trust Bowers and McBride still a little bit more. At number 4, Tucker Kraft has been lights out this season. The matchup is also a big positive one. The Panthers rank top 8, and Kraft should have another touchdown and close to 100 yards. He is by far the best pass catcher in Green Bay. These next 3 are dropping down a tier, and there is a little bit more risk, but at number 5, I have George Kittle at the Giants. He's still coming back from his hamstring injury, and although he had a great game last week, only 40 yards and a touchdown, it wasn't the highest ceiling you could have asked for. So if Purdy does get the start, then I'll bump up Kittle into the next tier above. But until I know that for sure, I'll keep Kittle at number 5. You're not benching Kittle, but I do think Kraft, Warren, McBride, and Bowers will have a better game in week 9. At number 6, I have Jake Ferguson versus Arizona, who probably bounces back in a major way off the bagel, especially given Arizona is a top 5 matchup. So he should get back in the end zone, especially at home. Dak usually plays much better. It was just Denver trying to take him away, and it did work out. The Broncos did win pretty comfortably. So Ferguson should bounce back. I'm not going to panic after just one bad game. I didn't panic after Kittle's bagel, and I'm not going to panic after Ferguson gives you a bagel as well. So tight end often is a bit up and down. Sometimes they're just a bad performance, but usually a player of this caliber will bounce back. Ferguson is worth trusting. He's been so good up to this point. At number 7, I'm going to trust the consistency with Travis Kece. Even if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's been pretty bust-proof this year. And then last week was just so good, I am definitely going to trust him. Despite the terrible matchup, it ranks bottom 2 against Buffalo. I'm going to overrule that and still put Kece in the top 7. I just can't really think of a reason to bench him. And this is kind of a primetime game given the weight of the matchup. I expect Kece to step up, as he usually does, in other primetime games. Like on Monday night, he had almost 100 yards and a touchdown in primetime. So trusting Travis Kece, I think Mahomes plays lights out and Kece is still a go-to target. And then these next 3 are in another tier, but still top 10. I would definitely start these guys as well. But maybe there is like one remaining lingering red flag that you can point to. With Oronde Gadsden, he's still a rookie, and to pretend like the last 2 games are repeatable all the time would be a little naive. I love his upside. If he told me he had 100 yards and a touchdown again, wouldn't be surprised. But at Tennessee, they probably don't need to throw the ball that much in the second half. If he doesn't score by the time it's just garbage time, there's a chance that Gadsden does let you down. It's about time that he has a dud performance, but he's looked so amazing last 2 games, I can't envision you bench him if you picked him up off the waiver wire. But perhaps he may have peaked. Maybe if you have Gadsden, you might be looking to shop him in a trade. I'm sure his trade value is sky high at the moment. At number 9, I have Sam LaPorta versus Minnesota, and the matchup stats are relatively fine for him, so I think he'll do okay. The yardage should be there. I think he's a fine top 10 option. If you drafted him, you might be a bit disappointed given all the other high-end upside with players taken later, but LaPorta's still been decent enough where I would start him in most matchups. At number 10, I have Mark Andrews at Miami. It all depends on Lamar Jackson starting. If it's Tyler Huntley, then no, I would bench him, but I am expecting Lamar. It does sound like Lamar will be good to go on Thursday night. So the matchup is not bad for Andrews. It does rank top 10 here. So as long as Isaiah Likely doesn't vulture him, I would trust Andrews in my lineup in the top 10. But at number 11, I think we're entering the streaming conversation. And literally these next 7 players all have an argument to be the best streaming option on the week. But at 11, I'm going to rank AJ Barner here, a player that is very seldom rostered, but has had some really high upside this year. A lot of touchdowns for Barner that have gone unnoticed, but not by me. I think AJ Barner is a very safe play this week. The matchup for him does rank top 7, and in the last 2 games, the Commanders have allowed 3 touchdowns to the position. So I like his upside. I like the matchup. I like Darnold a lot this week, and Barner is a consistent contributor in this offense. Do not dismiss him just because we didn't know about him entering the year. He does have a lot of value. Off the wire, I would start him at number 11 in my rankings. At number 12, I think Theo Johnson will live up to the upside this week. His trends have been 1 week with a touchdown and then 1 week without them. So last week he did not score. I think this week the trends suggest it will come back to him. And given there's no Cam Scatterbo anymore on the goal line, they might be looking elsewhere in those opportunities. Theo has really gotten a lot of targets near the goal line. So I think the touchdown is a relatively safe bet for him. The matchup isn't bad, but it's also not great. It ranks average, and that's why I'm just expecting the trends with Theo to repeat. When he does go off, he has a lead upside. He could give you 18 fantasy points with not just 1, but 2 touchdowns. I like Theo Johnson quite a bit. At 13, I like Dalton Kincaid a lot, but this week the matchup is bottom 4, so I'm going to believe that that's a big downgrade. Last week, given he was banged up and injured, he also played very mediocre. I don't like what I'm seeing from Kincaid at the moment. I think the injury is a very relevant factor. He's not 100%. So in a tough matchup, knowing he's kind of their number 1 option in the passing game, I would expect the Chiefs to try to stop him, and they've been stopping every other tight end pretty well so far. So a big downgrade for Kincaid, not my favorite start at all, not very safe in my opinion. Based on name value, I can't drop him too far down the list. At 13, I still think he has some legitimate value to start as a streaming option. Not my favorite, but still probably expecting about 8 or so points from Kincaid. If he scores a touchdown, you wouldn't be surprised. The upside is still pretty high in Buffalo. At 14, though, Zack Ertz has been a yo-yo type of player. It's all dependent on Jaden Daniels being available, and that is what I'm expecting on Sunday Night Football. So if it's Mariota, then definitely drop down Ertz. He's not going to be a safe play at all, but they ruled out Terry McLaurin already, and that's definitely going to add to the upside of Zack Ertz. The volume should be safe for at least like 6 or 7 targets, and a touchdown has been pretty reliable to bet on as long as Daniels is the guy. So not a lock in your lineup. At this point in the rankings, you might just not have the space to fit him in. Odds are he's not in your lineup, but there are 4 teams on bye, not many players that are relevant, but if you have to replace someone like Dallas Goedert, for instance, or Cade Otton, then Zack Ertz is not a bad option to do that with. At number 15, I have Kyle Pitts at New England, and I want to rank him higher. The Patriots are a very good matchup, ranks top 6 overall, and they did just give up 2 touchdowns to the Browns tight end. So Pitts could find the end zone, but in general, his upside is pretty capped. And he's also very inconsistent. Every time you want to trust him, he usually lets me down. So the highest I can go is 15, but the matchup stats indicate he will have good yardage this week and a decent shot at a touchdown. It is possible I'm ranking him too low, but given it's Kyle Pitts, I just never feel that confident about endorsing him. So no thanks. If I can avoid it, I will. But if you have to, the matchup suggests he's not the worst option you could find. Colston Loveland gets the best matchup overall. And if it wasn't for his lack of production this season, I'd probably rank him ahead of AJ Barner at the top of this tier. So I could definitely argue for it that maybe I'm too low in the rankings. The matchup against Cincinnati suggests a touchdown is a very safe bet here. But I don't know for a fact that Cole Kmet will miss time. So if Cole Kmet is inactive, I might bump up Loveland above Kincaid. But until I know that for sure, he's on the bottom of this tier. At 16, I'd probably still keep him on the waiver wire. Until he actually proves that he can play well, I just don't know what you're going to get. There's still a lot of risk regarding Colston Loveland. But the matchup is so good, I kind of want to dismiss all of that and rank him as a must start. At 16, though, you can probably do better. At 17, another great matchup here goes to JaTavion Sanders of the Panthers. Green Bay has been really vulnerable at stopping tight ends. So a good upgrade for JaTavion. However, in Carolina's offense, it's not the safest bet. And who knows, maybe Tommy Tremble does vulture him with a random touchdown. It is possible to happen. But JaTavion should get enough volume to cover you. The Packers allow 8 catches per game to the position. So I think volume will be his calling card. I think JaTavion will have a safe floor, but the touchdown upside is not the safest bet. I'd rather avoid him if I can, but the matchup suggests he could offer 14 plus points. The Packers do allow that on the season to opposing tight ends. Next up, though, these next 4 players are in the tier below, and at this point, it's getting really hard to trust. There's just too many names and not enough spots in your roster to actually start them. So I'm not going to trust these guys. I think you could leave them on the waiver wire, honestly, and not feel bad about it. You can stream the position every single week and make a pivot based on matchups and give up on them. But Dalton Schultz had a great game 2 weeks ago. Perhaps it comes back to him, but last week was bad. I think he is banged up and not fully healthy, so going to avoid him if I can. And same with Evan Engram. The matchup for both of them in this game is bottom 10. So Engram definitely draws the tougher matchup, and he's more of a floor play in general, rarely scores touchdowns. I don't trust Bo Nix this week. I'm not going to trust Evan Engram. TJ Hockenson in a revenge game maybe plays well, but I don't trust JJ McCarthy, and Hockenson has not scored touchdowns this season. I will pass. If all you want is 6 points, then go ahead, but I see a lot more upside with guys like AJ Barner and Theo Johnson. So no thanks on TJ Hockenson, and no thanks on Jonnu Smith. Even though it's a good matchup, it's just a little too cute to bet on. Because Freiermuth and even Darnell Washington are there, it could definitely pivot elsewhere at tight end. The matchup is good, but I kind of don't care because it's the Steelers. So no thanks on Jonnu despite the upgrade. And then beyond the top 21, I'm definitely benching all these guys, but Hunter Henry gets the worst matchup this week against Atlanta. I'm 100% fading Hunter Henry. Without a touchdown, you will get screwed, and I don't think it happens. The Falcons have only allowed 1 touchdown this season and only 15 yards per game to the position. No thank you on Hunter Henry. I don't see the upside at all. At 23, we got Chig Okonkwo versus the Chargers, and the matchup is bottom 10, so I'll avoid him. Even in a good matchup last week, he still wasn't amazing, so very matchup dependent. Not going to trust him in a bad one. Taysom Hill, I still think is due for a big blow-up game, but to bet on him with confidence is very risky, so no thanks there. And then Noah Fant should have decent yardage, but very little touchdown production. The Chicago Bears do allow 50-plus yards per game to tight end. So Fant should have a decent floor, but not much upside. And then these last 5 outside the top 25, I'm definitely benching, but I could see some value for the Rams tight end. I'm hopeful that Terrence Ferguson gets the job soon, but at the moment, it's between Higbee and Terrence Ferguson, so no thanks with either of them. And then Isaiah Likely starting to run more routes now that he's healthy off the bye. He looked better last week, but still need to see it before I trust him. So on my radar, but not going to start him. And then 2 backups in good matchups. We have Freiermuth and Elijah Arroyo. Just too many mouths to feed at this point. Not safe options. The backup tight end is not a player I want to start, but I do think they have some upside given their matchups this week. They could play spoiler if you trust the other one. I'm hopeful that AJ Barner doesn't let me down. If he does, it's because Elijah Arroyo will probably step up and steal the touchdown. Lastly, let's talk about the defensive position where the matchups are really weird. And honestly, I had a hard time ranking this position this week. At 1 and 2, it's pretty obvious. I love both of the LA teams. The Rams versus Tyler Shuck, rookie quarterback making his debut. Sign me up. That's a no-brainer. The Rams are an elite play. But the Chargers at Tennessee, everyone is a good play against the Titans. So given they have extra rest, their defense should be very well rested. Their game plan should be great. The Chargers are an elite play at the Titans. But 3 through 6 are still pretty safe bets, and it's mainly because of how well they've played this season. The Packers versus Carolina, especially if you get Andy Dalton, I would trust that for sure. I would expect Micah Parsons to get some sacks in this game, but their secondary hasn't been elite at forcing turnovers. I could see them not offer like elite upside, but the floor I think is bust proof against Carolina with Green Bay. Number 4, I got the Jaguars at Las Vegas, and honestly, I kind of want to drop the Jags significantly down the list because I did take the Raiders to win this game. But the Jaguars have been consistent in the turnover department this season, and given it's against Geno Smith, I have to trust them. So I would still start the Jags with confidence, but I could see the Raiders offense all of a sudden wake up now that Bowers and Jacoby Myers are back on the team. Bowers is a matchup nightmare, and that could be a problem. This game is in Las Vegas, and who knows, the Jags just did give up 5 touchdown passes to Matthew Stafford. Perhaps they're not as good as we think, but against Las Vegas, you should trust the defense facing them. The Jags at number 4 feels like a safe call. At 5 and 6, though, I'm trusting the talent with both defenses. I'm going to assume that this game is much more of a low-scoring, grinded-out battle. Maybe the final score is like 9-12, as opposed to a shootout between the Broncos and Texans. Both defenses are elite. The Broncos probably get the better matchup, though. The Texans offense doesn't scare you as much. But if Surtain does not play, then I might flip them in the ranks. The Texans are favored by Vegas. I did pick them to win, but I kind of feel like I'm just hating on the Broncos a little too much. I'll still rank the Broncos defense above the Texans. You can't tell me that Houston is a tougher matchup than the Broncos on offense. Sean Payton's offense is much better than the Texans offense with Stroud. So Broncos at 5, Texans at 6, a low scoring game. I expect multiple turnovers from both teams. I think they'll have good fantasy games this week in week 9. At 7 through 10, the tier below is a little more risky, but still relatively safe. Most of these matchups are pretty solid, and then most of these defenses do have some talent. But the Patriots versus the Falcons, if it's Kirk Cousins, I would bump them up like 5 spots. I would rather have the Patriots versus Cousins than the Packers versus Bryce Young this week. So maybe they'll be moving up, but if it's Penix, I could still see that offense play well. It's going to require London on the field, but Bijan probably goes nuclear after his terrible game. There is some risk anytime you face off against Bijan Robinson, but it didn't happen last week for the Dolphins. Maybe the Patriots are an elite play yet again. The Lions versus JJ McCarthy, I would trust some turnovers to happen, so I trust Aiden Hutchinson to get some sacks. I think they'll turn it over at least once or twice. And if the secondary is healthy, then they probably catch a pick, if not 2. So I like the Lions upside because I don't trust JJ McCarthy, but maybe I'm underestimating the Vikings offense a little bit. And then at 9 and 10, the Seahawks Commanders game should be kind of interesting. There's a chance that it's a shootout though, so there is actually a lot of risk here. I could see it blow up in your face, but if you told me that the Seahawks defense off the bye plays exceptionally well, that wouldn't shock me. Their defense should be healthier. And then the Commanders, I think, will keep it close, regardless if it's a high score or low score. Their season is kind of on the line. They've lost 3 in a row. They can't really afford to lose 4. So with no Terry McLaurin, I think the Seahawks are pretty safe. But the Commanders honestly feel like a bit of a liability. Not going to lie, I kind of feel like I'm ranking them too high. But I think that's a close game, and that's why I'll keep them both in the same category. It's mainly because I don't trust that many defenses moving forward. There are some good defenses on bye, as well as some good defenses with bad matchups the rest of the way. So the Commanders do crack my top 10, but that's one I don't feel great about. And then at 11 through 14, these are the last ones I think I would be streaming if I was desperate. The Ravens get the Dolphins, so I would expect Tua to throw some turnovers here, but last week he did not. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Ravens should step up. Their defense is healthy, and I think they'll play pretty well like they did the last 2 games. They've allowed less than 20 points on offense in their last 2 matchups. So hopeful, but a little bit risky for sure. If it wasn't Tua opposite them, I wouldn't rank the Ravens in the top 20. But number 12, I got the Falcons at New England. Other than last week, the Falcons defense has been really good, and I don't know why they didn't wake up last week, but against the Patriots, given the 28-3 narrative, I think still looms in the building, the Falcons probably put all their focus on this Patriots matchup. I think they'll hold their own, but against Drake May, it's not going to be that good. I would still trust the Patriots to win and fade the Falcons a little bit because it's against Drake May. But the Panthers at Green Bay have an underrated defense. I think they're being slept on a little bit. And it's not like Jordan Love has been so convincing that you know for a fact the Packers offense will be elite. So maybe I'm disrespecting them, but I do think Carolina could keep this game somewhat closer than Vegas would suggest. The line is 13.5, and maybe it's just because the Panthers offense is so bad, but I do think they'll hold Green Bay to less than 30 points and probably get at least 1 turnover in this matchup. I think it'll work out, but just a floor play with the Panthers. At 14, I don't trust the Jaguars offense too much, but to trust the Raiders feels kind of stupid, so I kind of feel like this ranking is off. But I told you when I mentioned the Jaguars ranking, I did pick the Raiders to win, so perhaps they do play well. Maybe it's a shootout and it doesn't matter. Maybe neither defense is startable at all, but the Jaguars offense, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. is unavailable, doesn't feel like a scary one. Overall, I could see the Raiders with a final score of like 24-23, and maybe they get enough sacks. Maybe Max Crosby does step up. But this one does feel risky. However, as I go through the rest of the list, tell me where you feel confident with any other team. We have the Colts at Pittsburgh. The Colts defense is really banged up in the secondary, and there's probably a lot of garbage time. So I do think Rodgers can still put up good numbers. Rodgers doesn't really throw interceptions that much, so Colts I don't think have much upside. They could really burn you in garbage time. The Chiefs at Buffalo, are you really starting a defense against Josh Allen? I'd rather not. The Bears at Cincinnati, the Bears defense is playing better, but Jamar Chase and T. Higgins do scare me. The Bengals offense is a nightmare, so not excited with them. And then this next tier, the Giants-Niners game, could easily be a shootout. Neither defense is that good, so I'll pass. Both offenses could be a very scary matchup. The Vikings at Detroit, you really trust the Lions? I know the Vikings have talent, but do you really trust a defense going up against the Lions in Detroit? Fuck that. The downside is literally in the negative, so no thanks with the Vikings. And then the Bills against the Chiefs, maybe there's a turnover like last week. Mahomes did throw 2 interceptions, but yikes. No chance I'm trusting the Bills. That game's probably a big shootout in the first place. And then the Cowboys have the worst defense in the league, so fuck that shit. The Cardinals have a good defense, but against the Cowboys, one of the best offenses, I'll pass on that. The Bengals defense is complete garbage, so why the fuck would you go there? The Titans against the Chargers? Fuck no. The Saints against the Rams? Fuck no again. And then the Dolphins against Lamar, the Steelers against the Colts. Where the fuck are the good matchups this week? I don't see it. With the Eagles on bye, the Bucks on bye, even the Jets and the Browns are pretty solid on defense. We are missing some key options overall. So you can tell me my rank on the Raiders at 14 is gross as fuck. You can tell me you don't trust the Commanders at number 10, but I just don't see that many other good matchups outside the top 15 that I actually want to bet on. So the top of the ranks are really weird at defense. I trust the Rams and Chargers a lot, but beyond them, I think it's a big coin toss with every other team. The top 10 are really the only ones I would like to trust. After the Commanders, it gets really, really ugly really fast. So good luck at defense. I honestly think you could start no defense this week and get away with it. There are a lot of risks for negatives at this position. At tight end, I think the top 4 are all going to have amazing games this week. Bowers is a lock in the lineup if healthy. McBride should play well. I'm hoping that Brissett is the quarterback, though. Warren has the second best matchup against Pittsburgh. He should go off. And then Kraft gets another top 10 matchup against Carolina. He's a lock in the lineup. Kittle, Ferguson, and Kece, too much production overall in their careers, or at least this season, to fade. I would trust them. Some good matchups for Kittle and Ferguson. A bad matchup for Kece, but I don't care. Oronde Gadsden looking amazing right now, so he's top 10. LaPorta in a decent matchup should play well. And Andrews also top 10 matchup. I like him quite a bit. But my favorite streamer is A.J. Barner, a great matchup for him. Theo Johnson, also a pretty good bet for a touchdown. Kincaid gets a downgrade, but in the Bills offense still has upside. Zack Ertz with no Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels coming back always has a touchdown upside as well. Kyle Pitts in a good matchup. Kind of tempting, but a bit gross. Loveland and JaTavion Sanders, an upgrade because of the matchup. They both rank top 3, but neither has been safe enough to fully trust. And then 18 through 21, I'm going to bench him, but should have decent floors. Schultz probably gets like 7 targets. Engram, same. Hockenson is usually good for 6 points. And then Jonnu Smith in a good matchup also probably gets you about 6 points or so. Those are my rankings this week in week 9 at quarterback, tight end, and defense. I'll update them based on injury news on Saturday, but for the most part, other than some quarterbacks that might be taken out, I don't see many players changing in these lists. So that's it for me. My name is Adam Riancho. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you tomorrow, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.